When the grave opened beneath his feet, Commander Theron Vale understood that death was negotiable. He had expected fire, perhaps the slow fade into darkness that priests spoke of in hushed tones. What he did not expect was the cold, a cold so absolute it felt like teeth sinking into his lungs, scraping against bone. The battlefield above had gone silent. The screaming, the clash of steel, the roar of siege engines, all of it swallowed by earth and shadow. Theron's last memory of the living world was a troll berserker's axe splitting his shield, then his collarbone, then something wet and warm flooding his chest cavity. Now he was somewhere else. The darkness shifted, moved, breathed. A presence unfurled around him like wings made of winter itself. And Theron felt his consciousness pulled upward through frozen soil, through roots that had drunk the blood of 10,000 corpses, through layers of permafrost that remembered when this land had been green. His body followed, dead weight animated by will that was not his own. His eyes opened to a sky the color of old bruises, and the first thing he saw was the frozen throne. It rose from ice-crowned citadel, like a wound in reality, a jagged monument of ice and malice that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the eye could properly track. Theron tried to move his jaw and found it sluggish, unresponsive. His tongue tasted of iron and frost. Around him, other corpses were rising, men and women in the tattered remains of Alliance tabards. Horde war paint still visible beneath layers of grave dirt. Some were freshly dead. Others had been buried for weeks, their flesh hanging loose from bone. Theron was a soldier, 37 years wearing Alliance colors, 15 of those as a battlefield commander in Lordaeron. He had fought through 3 wars, survived the Scourge's initial invasion, watched his homeland crumble into a nightmare of plague and undeath. He had developed an instinct for understanding his enemy, for reading intention in the way forces moved across a map. That instinct was screaming now. This was not random. The Scourge did not raise the dead indiscriminately. He had learned that much during the fall of Lordaeron. The mindless zombies, the shambling ghouls, the skeletal warriors that filled the Scourge's ranks by the thousands. Those were fodder, tools, expendable mass produced by plague and necromantic ritual. But what stood around him now were different. Every corpse rising from this frozen earth wore the remnants of rank insignia. Officers, veterans, champions. Something was selecting them. A voice rolled across the assembled dead like thunder through a crypt, and Theron felt his spine straighten without his permission, his dead muscles responding to a will that bypassed conscious thought entirely. You have been chosen. The Lich King stood at the precipice of his throne's platform, a figure encased in Saronite armor that drank light and gave back only shadow. The helm of domination crowned his head, a thing of blades and malice that seemed to cut the very air around it. Behind the helm's eye slits there was nothing, no glow of undeath, no flicker of humanity, just a vast, patient intelligence that had examined Theron Vale's entire existence in the span between death and resurrection, and found him adequate. You stand before me not because you died, but because of how you lived. Theron's dead heart lurched. The sensation was wrong, mechanical, a thing responding to necromantic energy rather than blood and muscle. But the emotion it produced was entirely his own. Terror, not the sharp fear of battle, but something deeper. The understanding that whatever autonomy he had possessed was now theoretical at best. The Lich King descended the steps of his throne, each footfall producing a sound like cracking ice that echoed across the assembly of newly raised dead. Theron counted them instinctively, the old habit of a field commander assessing forces. 53. 53 corpses standing at rigid attention, their dead eyes fixed on the approaching figure. The Scourge has no shortage of bodies, the Lich King continued, his voice reverberating inside Theron's skull as much as through his ears. The plague spreads. The fallen rise. Mountains of corpses answer my call every day. But corpses are not what I need for the work ahead. Corpses follow commands. They do not think. They do not adapt. They do not inspire fear beyond their mere existence. Be. He stopped before a night elf woman whose death had been recent. Theron could see the arrow still lodged in her throat, the fletching bright against purple skin gone pale with death. The Lich King regarded her for a long moment. You were a sentinel of Ashenvale. 3 centuries of service. 47 confirmed kills against the Warsong clan. You held the Silverwind Refuge for 8 hours alone after your unit was overrun. The night elf's jaw worked silently. Some part of her was trying to speak, to protest, to reclaim the identity being catalogued before her. The Lich King placed one gauntleted hand on her shoulder, almost gently. You will hold ground I give you to hold. You will kill what I command you to kill. And you will do it with every ounce of skill you possessed in life, elevated by the strength of undeath. Because I did not raise you randomly, Sentinel. I raised you because you earned this. Earned. The word hung in the frozen air like a curse. The Lich King moved through the ranks, past a Tauren warrior whose horns had been painted with blood runes, past a human mage still clutching a spellbook in dead fingers, past a troll berserker whose tusks had been filed to points. To each he spoke, listed accomplishments, named victories, recounted moments of tactical brilliance or martial prowess that had occurred in life. Theron's turn came. Commander Theron Weil, 37 years of service, survivor of the Second War, defender of Andorhell during the initial plague outbreak. You evacuated 1,200 civilians before the city fell. Strategic mind, natural leader. Men followed you into situations they knew would kill them because you had proven you valued their lives above your own glory. The Lich King's presence was overwhelming this close, like standing at the edge of an abyss that was somehow also inside Theron's own skull. He could feel that vast intelligence rifling through his memories, pulling out moments he had thought forgotten. His first command, his worst defeat, the names of soldiers who had died under his orders, the face of his wife, dead of plague 3 years past. I have reviewed your entire life, Commander. Every decision, every victory, and every failure. You are one of 17,000 potential candidates on the field where you fell. Do you know why you stand here now, and the others remain buried? Theron found his voice, though it came out ruined and hollow. No, my king. The words were not his choice. They rose from some dark place in his mind that had already accepted this new reality, this new hierarchy. The part of him that remained Theron Weil, that remembered sunlight and warm bread and laughter, recoiled from the obedience. But it was drowning, sinking beneath the weight of the Lich King's will, pressing into his consciousness like water into a ship's hull. Because you are worth the effort, the Lich King gestured, and Theron's awareness suddenly expanded. He could feel threads connecting him to the others around him, sense their thoughts at the periphery of his own. The Sentinel's rage, the Mage's calculating assessment, the Tauren's stoic acceptance. 53 minds linked in a web with the Lich King at its center, conducting them like an orchestra of death. Ghouls require no selection. A corpse rises, it hungers, it kills, useful for overwhelming fortifications or clearing villages. Skeletons follow programmed commands. March here, stand there, fight until destroyed. Abominations are weapons of terror, stitched meat that exists to break morale. But you, he swept his hand across the assembled dead. You are different. You will be my Death Knights. The title carried weight. History. Theron knew it. Every soldier in Azeroth knew it. Death Knights were not mere undead. They were champions. Knights in the truest sense, elevated to a dark mirror of what they had been. And the process, he was beginning to understand, was not merely raising corpses. It was selection. I perceive every death in my domain, the Lich King continued, beginning to pace before them like a general before troops. The scourge spans continents. Thousands die daily within range of my influence. Warriors, civilians, children, the old, the young, the brave and the cowardly. Every soul that leaves its flesh where my power can reach becomes visible to me. He paused, and Theron felt that intelligence focusing again, this time on all of them at once. I see them all, and I choose. A human paladin near Theron's left. His armor still bore the seal of the Silver Hand. made a sound like choking. The Lich King turned toward him with something that might have been curiosity. "You question the honor in this, Sir Renaud. I can feel your thoughts. You believe you do not deserve to serve evil, that your faith should have protected you, that the light should not have allowed this." The paladin's dead eyes widened. Tears tried to form, but could not. His body was too cold, too empty of living fluid. Theron watched with a kind of detached horror as the man's will visibly crumbled. "The light permitted this because I am superior to it. But more relevant to your confusion, you misunderstand your situation. I did not choose you to punish you. I chose you because your skill is valuable. Your tactical knowledge of the Silverhand's deployments, your understanding of light-based defenses, your ability to predict how your former brothers will respond to threats." The Lich King's next words were quieter, but they carried across the frozen ground with perfect clarity. "You are not being damned. You are being promoted." The concept was obscene. Theron wanted to reject it, to rage against the violation of death itself being twisted into some grotesque career advancement. But he could feel it already. The truth underneath the horror. The Lich King was not lying. This was exactly how he perceived it. The Scourge was a hierarchy, and Death Knight sat near its apex. Below the Lich King himself, below the Liches and Dreadlords, but above everything else, an aristocracy of undeath. "The criteria are precise," the Lich King continued, addressing them all now. "Combat skill is necessary but insufficient. Courage, ironically, matters greatly. Cowards make poor commanders even in death. Strategic thinking, leadership ability, the capacity to make difficult decisions under pressure. These qualities are rare. They cannot be created through necromancy. They must be cultivated through life, earned through experience, proven through trial." He gestured toward the endless wasteland of ice crown stretching around them. "When a battle ends, when the living flee or die, I walk the field through the eyes of my servants. I examine the fallen. Most are rejected. Their bodies will rise as zombies if they encountered my plague, or they will remain dead if they were killed by ordinary wounds. But some," he looked at each of them in turn, "some demand attention." Theron remembered reading reports about Scourge behavior. The way certain commanders seemed targeted specifically. The way elite units would vanish entirely after battles, while common soldiers were left to reanimate as mindless dead. He had thought it was random, opportunistic. He had not understood it was curated. You, Commander Vaile, held a bridge for 2 days against overwhelming odds. Not through mere fighting, but through tactical use of terrain and calculated retreats that maximized enemy casualties while preserving your forces. This showed me 3 things: discipline, intelligence, and the willingness to sacrifice ground for strategic advantage. These are the qualities I need in my knights." The Lich King moved to the troll berserker, the same one whose weapon had killed Theron. "You, Zulmar, killed 137 enemies in your final battle. Your rage made you unstoppable. But more importantly, you waited. I watched you hold your position for 2 hours while Alliance forces passed nearby, waited until their command elements were exposed, then struck with perfect timing. Berserk rage controlled by tactical patience. Rare, valuable." Theron's military mind began processing despite his horror. The Lich King was describing force multiplication. He was building an officer corps, not just raising powerful individuals, but selecting for specific competencies that would make the Scourge more than a shambling horde. Leaders who could command autonomous operations, specialists who could solve complex problems, champions who could break enemy morale through reputation as much as violence. "The process requires resources," the Lich King said, and Theron realized this was a lesson, an explanation delivered with the patience of a teacher to students. Raising a Death Knight consumes more power than creating 1,000 zombies. Your bodies must be preserved at the moment of death. Decay limits potential. Your minds must be intact. Damage to the brain affects capability. And most importantly, I must invest personal attention. Each of you has had your entire life examined. Every memory searched, every skill catalogued. This is not automation. This is craft. He stopped at the center of the assembly, his presence radiating outward like cold. You are investments, and I invest in you, because you will provide returns that justify the cost. Each Death Knight I create is worth more to my war effort than 10,000 mindless undead. You will lead, you will adapt, you will think, and through you, the scourge becomes not merely overwhelming, but inevitable. The Night Elf Sentinel, Theron still did not know her name, spoke suddenly, her voice cracking with emotion even though her lungs could not properly breathe. We will resist. You cannot control us forever. Others have broken free. The Lich King regarded her for a long moment. When he spoke, there was something almost like approval in his tone. Yes, some have. The Forsaken, Sylvanas Windrunner. Even some Death Knights have recovered their will when my attention has been divided. Do you know what this tells me, Sentinel? He stepped closer to her. It tells me I chose well. Only those strong enough to potentially resist are worth raising in the first place. Weak minds remain bound forever, which makes them ultimately useless for anything requiring judgment. Strong minds might one day break free, which means they were valuable enough to risk losing. This is the calculation, and I make it every time I choose. The implications were staggering. The Lich King was deliberately creating undead servants powerful enough to potentially defy him, because anything less capable was insufficiently useful. He was gambling that his control would hold long enough to extract value and accepting that some would eventually slip the leash. It was the thinking of a general who understood force economy, who knew when to spend resources and when to conserve them, who recognized that perfect control was impossible and planned accordingly. Theron felt his dead heart clench again with that mechanical horror. He was not just enslaved. He was selected for his quality, like a horse being chosen for breeding or a sword being selected from an armory. His competence had made him a target. His skills had killed him more thoroughly than any blade. Now, the Lich King said, and his voice carried new weight, you will train. You will learn to channel the runic magic that powers you. You will master the weapons I provide. You will study the tactics of those you will face. And when I judge you ready, you will be deployed. He turned and began ascending back toward the frozen throne. Some of you will be sent to command garrisons. Others will hunt specific targets, champions of the living whose elimination serves strategic purpose. A few will lead assaults on critical objectives. Your assignments will match your capabilities. Just as I chose you based on what you were, I will use you based on what you can become. At the top of the stairs, the Lich King paused and looked back. You exist because you earned existence, because your lives made you valuable to my purpose. The Scourge has no shortage of bodies, but it has very few minds worth preserving. Remember this as you serve. You are not random casualties pressed into service. You are selected champions of the inevitable. He sat upon the frozen throne, and Theron felt the connection between them crystallize. A permanent tether of ice and will binding his consciousness to that vast, patient intelligence. Welcome to immortality. Around Theron, the other Death Knights began to move, shuffling toward the structures below where they would be equipped and trained. He moved with them, his body obeying commands before his conscious mind could form them. The Sentinel walked beside him, her dead eyes staring straight ahead. He is telling the truth, she whispered in Darnassian. I can feel it. We were chosen. Selected. Yes, Theron replied in the same language, his linguistic knowledge apparently preserved perfectly in undeath. We earned this by being good at what we did. Yes, her next words came after a long pause, filled with a despair deeper than death itself. Then we were already dead the moment we became skilled enough to notice. Theron had no answer for that, because she was right. The Lich King had been watching, waiting, measuring them not just in their final moments but throughout their entire lives. Every victory, every display of competence, every moment of tactical brilliance had been observed by an intelligence vast enough to track thousands of potential candidates simultaneously. They had not been killed in battle and then raised opportunistically. They had been identified, targeted, and harvested with the precision of farmers selecting the best crops. As they descended into the bowels of Icarus, the floating necropolis that would be their new home, Theron caught glimpses of what awaited. Training yards where Death Knights learned to channel frost and unholy magic. Armories filled with rune-blade weapons that hummed with captured souls. Briefing rooms where the Lich King's lieutenants, liches with robes that stank of ancient death, would assign them missions. And beyond, through massive windows of frozen crystal, he could see the rest of the scourge. The ghouls and skeletons and abominations. The countless, mindless dead that served as the bulk of the army. The ones who had not been chosen, who had simply died and been raised as tools. Theron realized he was grateful he had been selected. The thought came unbidden, poisonous, but it was there. He had not simply become a shambling corpse. He retained his mind, his memories, his identity, even if all of it was now shackled to another's will. Among the dead, there was still hierarchy, still value, still distinction between the special and the expendable. The Lich King had not just enslaved him. He had made him complicit in his own enslavement by framing it as recognition of excellence. It was, Theron thought with the part of his mind that still remembered being human, the most sophisticated form of damnation he could imagine. Later, he had no way to measure time in this place of eternal twilight. Theron stood at a window overlooking Icecrown's wastes. His rune blade rested against his shoulder, its weight comfortable in a way his old sword had never been. The weapon had been presented to him with ceremony, its runes inscribed with knowledge of his tactical specialty. It was custom-made, personal. Another Death Knight joined him at the window. The Tauren, his massive frame diminished slightly by death, but still imposing. "I was a champion of my people," the Tauren said without preamble, his voice rumbling from a chest that no longer needed to breathe. "Earned my weapons through ritual combat. Proved myself worthy in the eyes of the Earth Mother." "Past tense?" Theron asked. "He made it past tense. The Lich King, by valuing the same things my people valued, his skill, courage, strength, but twisting the reward. I thought I earned honor. I earned this instead." The Tauren tapped one finger against the window's frozen surface. But the mechanism was the same. Recognition of merit leading to elevation. He simply replaced the system I believed in with his own, and used my own pride as the bridge between them. Theron looked at the massive undead warrior beside him and saw the same trap he was caught in. They had both lived lives of achievement, measuring their worth through demonstrated competence. The Lich King had simply found them in death and said, "Yes, you were worthy. Now be worthy for me." "How many do you think he evaluates?" Theron asked. "How many dead does he examine before finding one of us?" "Thousands," a new voice said. The Night Elf Sentinel had approached silently. In life, her stealth would have been supernatural. In death, it was absolute. "I heard the Liches talking. For every Death Knight raised, the Lich King reviews approximately 15,000 corpses. We are the top percentile, the best of the dead." She laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "We should be proud." But her eyes held only anguish. Theron turned back to the window and watched as a tide of zombies marched across the frozen plain below, heading toward some distant battle. 10,000 corpses moving as one. And somewhere, he knew, the Lich King was watching those battles unfold, examining the fallen, searching for the next generation of knights to raise. The process never stopped. The evaluation never ceased. Every battlefield in Northrend, perhaps beyond, was simultaneously a war zone and a recruitment ground. The living fought to survive. The Lich King fought to win while simultaneously shopping for talent among their corpses. It was industrialized selection, Darwinian undeath, the scourge as a meritocracy where the reward for competence was eternal servitude. Theron's dead fingers tightened on his rune blade's grip. He could feel the weapon's power humming against his palm, feel the magical knowledge being transmitted directly into his mind by necromantic conditioning. He was being trained, shaped, optimized for his role in the Lich King's grand strategy. And the worst part, the part that made him want to scream if his lungs still worked properly, was that he could feel himself accepting it. The military discipline that had defined his life was still there, but now it served a new commander. The pride he had taken in tactical excellence remained, but now it was directed toward different objectives. He was still a soldier, still a leader, still valuable, just repurposed. The sentinel spoke quietly beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. I have been thinking about what he said, about how we earned this, and I realized something. What? He is building something, not just an army, a kingdom. He called us an aristocracy. He meant it literally. We are the nobility of the dead, chosen not through birth or random chance, but through proven merit. In his kingdom, advancement is earned through competence demonstrated in life and service in death. She turned to look at Theron, her dead eyes reflecting the cold light of Icecrown. He is creating a new civilization, and he wants us to think of ourselves as its elite, its founding class, the chosen few who were good enough to matter. Does it change anything? The Tauren asked. Knowing his purpose? No, Theron said after a long moment. Because he has already won. The moment he made us valuable enough to notice, he won. Every achievement we earned in life became evidence for our selection in death. Our own excellence was the trap. He looked out at the legions of mindless undead below, and for the first time since his resurrection, Theron Vale understood the full scope of what the Lich King represented. Not just a military threat, not simply a necromancer with vast power, but something more insidious, a system that rewarded competence with damnation and called it promotion. Far above, seated on the frozen throne, the Lich King's consciousness stretched across Northrend and beyond, perceiving battles, cataloging the fallen, measuring worthiness. In a village 300 miles south, a young paladin was distinguishing herself through tactical acumen and courage under fire. In the Borean tundra, a mage was developing innovative ways to counter necromantic magic. In Zuldrak, a troll shadow hunter had just survived an encounter that should have killed him through sheer cleverness. The Lich King noted them all, added them to his lists, and waited. Because that was the secret none of the living understood. The Scourge did not need to kill everyone. It only needed to kill the right ones, the ones worth raising, the ones whose skills made them irreplaceable. Everyone else could live or die as chance dictated. They did not matter. It was not a war of annihilation. It was a war of acquisition. And every hero who fell, every champion who died fighting the good fight, every leader who made the ultimate sacrifice, they were not losses to the Scourge. They were candidates, potential recruits to an army that only accepted the most qualified applicants. Death was the interview. Competence was the resume. And the Lich King was always hiring. Theron stood at his window and felt the weight of eternity settling onto his dead shoulders. He would serve. He would command. He would lead the Lich King's forces with every ounce of tactical brilliance he had cultivated through 4 decades of military service. Not because he chose to, but because that excellence was exactly why he had been chosen. The trap was perfect, inescapable, self-inflicted. He had earned his death the moment he became good at preventing others. And somewhere in the frozen darkness, the Lich King approved. 3 weeks had passed since Theron's resurrection, or what passed for weeks in a place where time moved like frozen sap. The training had been relentless. Every morning, if morning was even a concept that applied to Icecrown's perpetual twilight, the Death Knights assembled in the practice yards below Acheris. They learned to channel runic magic, to bind frost and shadow to their will, to make their runeblade weapons extensions of their dead flesh. But the real education came from the assignments. Sharon stood in what the Liches called the Strategy Chamber, a vast room carved from a single block of enchanted ice that showed moving images across its surface. Maps, troop movements, intelligence reports harvested from captured minds. The Lich King himself was absent, but his presence was felt. That constant pressure at the back of Theron's consciousness, watching through his eyes, measuring his performance. A Lich named Amalthazad floated before the assembled Death Knights, his skeletal hands gesturing at the ice walls where images flickered and changed. Theron recognized him from reputation, one of the original cultists who had pledged himself to Ner'zhul's service before the Third War. Ancient, brilliant, utterly mad with the conviction that undeath was evolution rather than damnation. "You have been selected for deployment," Amalthazad announced, his voice crackling like winter wind through dead trees. "But first, you must understand the philosophy that governs our operations." The ice wall shifted, showing a battlefield. Living soldiers in Alliance colors fought against a tide of scourge ghouls. The living were winning, their formations holding, their commanders making good decisions. "Observe," the Lich continued, "the living fight with passion, with hope. They believe their skills matter, their training, their courage, and they are correct. These things do matter, which is precisely why we want them." The image zoomed to focus on a particular officer, a woman in plate armor who was coordinating defensive positions with practiced efficiency. Theron's trained eye immediately recognized competence in her movements, the way she positioned troops to maximize defensive advantage. "This commander is Lieutenant Sarah Greystone," Amalthazad said. "She has successfully held 3 different positions against Scourge assault. Her tactical acumen is exceptional. Her troops trust her absolutely. She has saved, by our estimates, approximately 800 lives through skilled leadership." The Lich's skeletal jaw opened in what might have been a smile. "She will die in 4 days. The ambush is already prepared. And when she falls, she will be evaluated for resurrection as one of you. Her skill guarantees it." Theron felt something twist in his dead chest. The Lich was describing murder as talent acquisition, targeted assassination as recruitment. "This is how the Lich King wages war," Amalthazad continued, "on 2 levels simultaneously. The surface war, the battles, the sieges, the territorial conquest, serves to identify targets. The real war is the selective harvesting of competence from our enemies. Every skilled leader who falls makes the living weaker while making us stronger. It is mathematics, optimization. The Sentinel," Theron had learned her name was Valeria Moonwhisper, spoke from beside him, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You are describing the systematic murder of the best and brightest specifically because they are valuable." "Yes," Amalthazad replied without hesitation. "And you are proof the strategy works. You were among the best of the living. Now you are among the elite of the dead. Your value did not disappear at death. It was transferred. Assets moving from one column to another on a very large ledger." The ice shifted again, now showing dozens of faces. Human, orc, night elf, dwarf, troll, draenei, all in military regalia, all marked with glowing red runes that pulsed like heartbeats. "These are your targets. Not for this mission specifically, but in general. These individuals have been identified through observation and intelligence gathering as possessing qualities that merit preservation. They do not know they are being watched. They believe they are simply fighting a war. In truth, they are auditioning." Theron stared at the faces. Some looked young, barely more than recruits. Others were grizzled veterans with scars mapping decades of service. Each represented someone who had worked hard, trained extensively, survived long enough to develop real expertise, and that expertise had marked them for death. "You are horrified," Amalthazad observed, looking directly at Theron. "I can see it in your posture, the rigidity, the way your hand has moved unconsciously toward your weapon. You still think like one of the living, Commander Vile. You think this is unjust." "It is targeted assassination of those who defend against you," Theron said carefully. "That is not philosophy. That is pragmatism masquerading as principle." The Lich drifted closer, his empty eye sockets somehow conveying amusement. "Then allow me to make it a principle. The Lich King does not waste potential. The living do. They send their best warriors to die in futile last stands. They sacrifice genius for symbolic victories. They allow their champions to age and wither and fade into obscurity. We preserve them. We ensure their skills are never lost. Tell me, Commander, which system truly values competence?" It was a trap, and Theron recognized it even as his dead mouth opened to respond. Any answer would validate the Lich's framework. Deny that the Lich King valued skill, and the evidence stood all around him. Death Knights selected specifically for their abilities. Admit the Lich King valued skill, and accept that his system of forced resurrection might somehow be more efficient than natural life. Velaria saved him from answering. Preservation without consent is not value. It is theft. Semantics, Amalthazad replied dismissively. You are all still capable of thought, of action, of purpose. You have lost autonomy, certainly, but you have gained something more durable. Your skills will never degrade. Your knowledge will never be forgotten. You will not age into irrelevance. And most importantly, you will be used to your full potential. The living waste their talent on politics, on bureaucracy, on the 1,000 petty considerations of mortal society. We have streamlined you. The Tauren Death Knight, Bloodhorn was his name, snorted, a sound strange coming from dead lungs. Streamlined into slaves. Slaves with purpose, the Lich countered. Slaves who matter. Consider your alternative. You died in battle. If the Lich King had not raised you, you would simply be gone. Wasted. All that training, all that experience, all that hard-won expertise would have ended. Instead, it continues, and will continue forever, serving a greater design. Theron wanted to argue, but a part of him, the part that the Lich King's will had already colonized, understood the logic. It was monstrous, but it was internally consistent. From a purely utilitarian perspective, allowing skilled individuals to die permanently was wasteful. If those skills could be preserved through necromancy, then doing so was simply efficient. The fact that it violated every principle of autonomy and consent was, from the Lich King's perspective, irrelevant. Your specific mission, Amalthazad continued, the ice walls shifting to show a new location, is somewhat different. You will not be assassinating anyone. Not yet. First, you must prove you can function autonomously. The image resolved into a fortress built into a mountainside. Theron recognized it immediately. Deer's Hand, one of the last major Alliance strongholds in the eastern Plaguelands. The fortification had held against multiple Scourge assaults through combination of strong defensive positions and skilled leadership. Tyr's Hand has become irritating, the Lich said flatly. It interferes with logistics. It serves as a rallying point for resistance. It must be eliminated. Your team, 12 Death Knights, will plan and execute the assault. You have complete tactical autonomy. The Lich King will not micromanage. He will simply observe. That last word carried weight. They would be watched, measured. Their performance would determine future assignments, their value in the hierarchy of the dead. Resources? Theron asked, his military training overriding his horror. If he was going to be forced to do this, some instinct demanded he at least do it competently. 300 ghouls, 50 skeletal warriors, 2 abominations, and your 12 Death Knights. The ghouls will follow simple commands. Advance, attack, hold position. The skeletons are slightly more sophisticated. The abominations are weapons you point and release. You and your fellow knights are the only elements capable of genuine tactical thinking. Amalthazad gestured, and tactical data began appearing on the ice. Guard rotations, supply lines, identified weak points in the fortification's design. You have 3 days to prepare. The Lich King expects results, but more importantly, he expects to see how you achieve those results. He is evaluating not just your success, but your methodology, your creativity, your ability to maximize the resources provided. The Lich paused, his skeletal head tilting slightly. There are 47 identified military personnel of note within Tyr's Hand. Champions, veterans, skilled commanders. You are not to destroy their bodies unnecessarily. Preserve what can be preserved. The Lich King will decide which are worth raising afterward. So even this assault was recruitment. Even this military operation was simultaneously talent scouting. Theron felt sick, or the memory of sickness, since his body could no longer properly experience nausea. You are dismissed. Commander Viley will serve as mission lead. The rest of you will receive your specific roles from him. The other Death Knights filed out, but Theron remained, staring at the tactical data on the ice walls. Tyr's Hand. He had visited it twice during his living service. Good people held that fortress. People who had lost homes and families to the scourge and chose to stand anyway, to be the line that held against the tide of undeath. Now, he would be the tide. You hesitate, Amalthazad observed, still floating nearby. Interesting. The Lich King chose you for your tactical skill, but perhaps he also chose you for this specific internal conflict. He does enjoy layered outcomes. What does that mean? It means, Commander, that your success or failure in this mission matters less than you think. What matters is how you reconcile your former principles with your current reality. The Lich King is watching not just what you do, but what you become in the process of doing it. The Lich drifted toward the exit, then paused. For what it is worth, I was once troubled as you are. I stood where you stand now, newly raised, horrified by what I had become. That faded. The horror becomes normal. The monstrous becomes merely practical. You will adapt, Commander. They all do. The Lich King knows this. It is why he chose you in the first place. Because your mind is strong enough to survive the transition intact. Then he was gone, leaving Theron alone with the tactical displays and the crushing weight of what was being asked of him. 3 days later, Theron stood on a ridge overlooking Tyr's Hand with his assembled force. The fortress looked exactly as he remembered. Walls of consecrated stone, banners of the Silver Hand flying from watchtowers, the faint glow of light-blessed wards shimmering in the air around its perimeter. Beside him, Velaria crouched in a posture of perfect stillness, her dead eyes scanning the fortification with predatory focus. The rest of the Death Knight team spread out along the ridge, specialists selected for different capabilities. 2 former paladins who understood light-based defenses, a mage who could counter magical wards, a siege engineer who had designed fortifications for the Alliance before his death. They had spent 3 days planning, analyzing patrol patterns, identifying supply vulnerabilities, calculating angles of approach and optimal timing. It was professional military work, and despite everything, Theron had found himself falling into familiar patterns. The problem-solving, the strategic thinking, the satisfaction of a plan well-crafted. The Lich had been right. The horror was already fading into practicality. The wards are weaker on the eastern wall, the dead mage, a human named Christoph, reported. Recent repairs. They prioritized structural integrity over magical reinforcement. If we breach there, we can be inside before they can properly organize a response. Defenders will funnel us into kill zones, one of the ex-paladins countered. They know their fortress. We will lose ghouls by the dozen. Ghouls are expendable, Bloodhorn rumbled. That is their purpose. We use them to identify defensive positions, then strike with precision. Theron listened to his team debate tactics and felt a strange cognitive dissonance. They were discussing the best way to kill people he might have once called allies, using the cold logic of military necessity. And it was working. The horror had not disappeared, but it had been compartmentalized, filed away where it could not interfere with operational effectiveness. The Lich King had known this would happen, had selected them specifically because they could make this transition. We strike at dawn, Theron decided. Christoph breaches the wards. Ghouls flood the eastern approach to draw attention and identify defensive positions. Death Knight teams follow behind, target command elements specifically. Abominations hold in reserve for breaking fortified positions. Objective is capture of the fortress with minimum destruction of valuable personnel. His voice was steady, professional, a commander giving orders. The fact that those orders would result in deaths and resurrections was simply part of the operational parameters. Velaria was watching him. He could feel her gaze. You have made peace with this, she said quietly. Not an accusation, an observation. No, Theron replied, but I have accepted it. There is a difference. Is there? I am not certain anymore. The difference, Theron said, still watching the fortress, is that acceptance means recognizing reality while hating it. Peace means no longer caring. I still care. I simply cannot afford to let that stop me from functioning. And when you stop caring? Theron did not answer, because they both knew what happened then. That was when he would truly become what the Lich King intended. A perfectly functional instrument of undeath, all resistance burned away by time and repeated compromise. The Lich King's presence suddenly intensified at the back of his mind, that vast attention focusing like sunlight through a lens. Theron felt his spine straighten involuntarily, felt his dead heart stutter in its mechanical rhythm. A voice echoed in his skull, heard by all 12 Death Knights simultaneously. "I am watching. Demonstrate your worth." Then the presence receded slightly, returning to its normal background pressure. But the message was clear. This was a test, not just of their tactical capability, but of their transformation from what they had been into, what they needed to become. Dawn came, and with it, the assault. Kristoff's magic unraveled the wards with surgical precision, exploiting the weakness he had identified. The ghouls poured forward in a tide of rotting flesh and mindless hunger, scrambling over each other in their eagerness to reach living meat. The defenders of Tyr's Hand responded with practiced efficiency. Archers on the walls, priests calling down light to burn undead flesh, warriors forming shield walls at choke points. It was a good defense, well coordinated, the work of skilled leadership, which made what came next easier to predict. Theron led his Death Knights through the breach after the initial ghoul wave, his rune blade cutting through consecrated air that stung his dead flesh like acid. He could see the defensive commander now, a dwarf paladin in silver armor standing at the intersection of 3 corridors, directing troops with hand signals and shouted orders. "There," Theron pointed. "Primary target." 3 Death Knights peeled off, moving with inhuman speed through the chaos of battle. The dwarf saw them coming, raised his hammer wreathed in light, and met their charge with the courage of someone who knew he was going to die, but refused to run. He killed one of the Death Knights, a former human warrior whose guard dropped at the critical moment. Then the other 2 overwhelmed him, and he fell. His armor crumpled, and his skull fractured, but not destroyed. Never destroyed. The body was valuable. The battle lasted 4 hours. Tyr's Hand fell room by room, corridor by corridor, each defensive position flanked or overwhelmed through tactical superiority and willingness to spend ghoul lives like currency. The defenders fought bravely. They always did. But they were facing an enemy that thought like they did, that understood defensive strategy because it had been trained in the same traditions, but no longer cared about casualties among its own fodder units. When it was over, 317 defenders lay dead. 43 had escaped through a hidden tunnel network Theron's team had deliberately left unsealed. Letting some survive would draw out future operations, give the enemy false hope, make them commit resources to retaking ground. And among the dead were 22 individuals whose bodies the Lich King's lieutenants immediately sequestered. Champions, specialists, commanders, each marked by their actions in battle as worthy of evaluation for resurrection. Theron stood in what had been the fortress's great hall, now filled with corpses being sorted by patient ghouls under Lich supervision. Blood slicked the consecrated floor. The banners of the Silver Hand had been torn down, replaced by scourge standards. He had just successfully conquered a fortress for the armies of the damned, and he felt nothing. No triumph, no shame, just completion. The mission was accomplished. The objectives were met. His performance had been measured and would be evaluated. This was what he was now. Valeria approached, her armor splattered with blood that was already freezing in the unnatural cold that radiated from their dead bodies. 17% casualties among our ghoul forces. Both abominations intact. All Death Knights survived. 22 high-value corpses secured. Fortress taken in 4 hours and 12 minutes. She was reporting, emotionless, professional. "The Lich King will be pleased," Theron replied, and hated how automatic the words felt. "Yes," Valeria agreed, then quieter. "I killed a sentinel I knew. In life. She taught me. I saw recognition in her eyes before. She stopped, and Theron saw something in her expression that might have been grief, if grief could exist in dead flesh. "It gets easier," he lied. Or perhaps it was not a lie. Perhaps it was prophecy. Perhaps every mission would file away more of what they had been until nothing remained except efficient instruments of the Lich King's will. The presence intensified again, and this time it was not merely watching. It was pleased. satisfied, approving. Words formed in Theron's mind, not heard but known, transmitted directly into consciousness. Well done. You have proven your value. This is merely the beginning. And Theron understood with terrible clarity that this was true. The assault on Tyr's hand was just the first test. There would be more missions, more compromises, more moments where he chose tactical efficiency over moral consideration. Each would become easier. Each would burn away a little more of who he had been. The Lich King was not just using their skills. He was refining them, removing the inconvenient parts, conscience, empathy, mercy, while preserving the useful elements, strategic thinking, leadership, adaptability. They were not just serving the scourge. They were becoming it. Among the sorted corpses, the dwarf paladin's body was loaded onto a wagon with special care. He would be taken to Icecrown, examined and possibly raised as another Death Knight. His skills had been noted, his value calculated. He had earned his resurrection through dying well. Theron turned away from the hall and walked to the fortress's highest tower, looking out over the plaguelands that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere out there, the living were preparing new defenses, training new champions, developing new skills, and the Lich King was watching them all, measuring, evaluating, waiting for them to become good enough to deserve his attention. It was not a war of conquest. It was cultivation. The living were crops, and the scourge harvested them at optimal ripeness. Below in the hall, leeches were already processing the bodies. Above on his throne, the Lich King was making decisions about which deserved to rise. And here on the tower, Theron Vile, former champion of the Alliance, now elite servant of the Scourge, felt the last fragments of his resistance crystallizing into something harder and colder. Acceptance. Not peace. Never peace. But acceptance of what he was, what he had become, and what he would continue to be for eternity. A selected instrument. A chosen blade. A Death Knight. The Lich King did not need to control every thought. He only needed to ensure that the thoughts that remained were useful to his purpose. And Theron, standing in the cold wind that no longer bothered his dead flesh, realized that he could not remember the last time he had thought something that was not useful. The selection process continued. Out in the world, the living fought and trained and survived, never knowing they were being evaluated. That their excellence was not armor, but target marking. That every skill they developed was being cataloged by an intelligence vast enough to track millions of potential candidates simultaneously. The Lich King did not need to kill everyone. He only needed to kill the right ones. And the living, in their courage and determination and skill, kept making themselves targets. Theron descended from the tower to write his after-action report. Detailed, professional, useful, exactly as he had been selected to be.